Good morning. I'm seated here in Bombay House, the headquarters of the Tata Group of companies in Mumbai, in what is perhaps India's only heritage platinum rated building, and in conversation with Jeremy Oppenheim. Jeremy is the founder of SystemiQ, an organization that's recently been founded to look at all the issues that the globe faces from a systems perspective. Jeremy has spent 25 years with McKinsey and has worked with several companies around the globe on many, many issues, including sustainability. Jeremy, a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much for being here.
Shankar, thank you very much for the invitation.
So let me start with a question that a lot of us think about when we think about sustainability, which is that it is a multidisciplinary, multifunctional issue. But companies are sort of structured in functions and divisions, almost siloed. How does one break this? How do the leading companies in the world actually think of sustainability across these silos, across these borders, and think of it as something holistic, which is really the way they should be looking at it?
It's a great question, and it's a hard one to answer at the start of the interview. So let me take a shot, though. What we learn time and again is that companies that are really leading on the sustainability agenda are coming at this not in a mechanistic way, but they're coming at it through the way they develop their leaders. And that is, of course, at the heart of this. It is the process by which we apprentice younger people and then managers as they come through the organization all the way through to top leadership in such a way that they are capable of taking an integrated, systemic perspective that cuts across functions, that looks outside the company, not just inside the company, that looks to the future, and provides real leadership. That's what leaders do. And the very best companies in the world are exceptionally good at developing those leaders, that talent, and in some sense, they've done it for decades. This is not new. This is not a new agenda. The idea that companies should have a real sense of purpose and a role in society, and that done well, that creates an advantage for those companies. And that is where leaders can make a huge difference. This is not new territory. This is territory that goes back 100 years, right? The very best companies tend to have built this into the DNA of the organization, into, in a sense, everything they do. So that you're sitting there in marketing, or you're sitting there in operations, or you're in the finance function, dare I say, right? And you have a genuine appreciation and understanding of the sustainability agenda, how the company relates to wider society, right? Where are the opportunities to create value through that relationship, and how to translate that into concrete, specific, practical business action. So that's a real leadership game. And I'd say that increasingly, those companies that get this right have a competitive advantage in the marketplace.
Some of the things that you spoke about yesterday, the Horizon 3 kind of mindset, is really long-term thinking. So how does a company sort of set itself up to sort of get into thinking long-term, thinking Horizon 3, investing in Horizon 3? What are those? How do successful companies end up being able to do that?
Well, I mean, I do believe that this argument about short-term versus long-term is sometimes an excuse for not getting on and having proper strategy. I mean, the one thing we know is that, the investors, of course they expect, delivery of performance against, shorter term agreed targets, right? And that's not unreasonable. If you can't deliver what you said you're going to do in the short term, then why would I ever believe that you're going to deliver the long term? And that's kind of the argument, and it's hard to dispute it. But that said, what we also know is that when companies come forward with really clear, well-formulated strategies that involve a long-term plan, and with real milestones on the way, so that it's not just that I'm promising you something in 10 years' time, it's always jam tomorrow, but you can see how we're going to go on a pathway to delivering a really special long-term goal, then investors will come with that. I mean, it's clear that investors are willing to back the Facebooks of the world and the Amazons of the world. They're willing to back Paul Pullman at Unilever. They have consistently invested in pharmaceutical companies that do decadal-long programs of research and development. So the key to all of this is to have a really good strategy, and then to be in a position to articulate how that strategy will get delivered over time and what the milestones are, and then to get on with it. And so my view is that sometimes there's a genuine problem, right? And the markets are biased to being short term and there's all this trading. But there are also times when that's used as an excuse. And I don't think we should use it in that way. And one of the things that the sustainability mindset, not the function, but the mindset can do for companies is to help them stretch their horizons and to help them explain to investors that in fact, to solve some of these tough issues and to be competitively advantaged is not going to be about day trading, my friends, right? It's about building real capabilities to decouple growth of the top line from resource use, or to show how that growth is deeply linked to tackling some of the bigger questions out there in terms of better urban development or a cleaner energy system. And none of that happens in a day, right? Rome wasn't built in a day, and nor will these issues be addressed. But the companies that can do this well will have a true competitive advantage.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, Jeremy. In fact, it sort of also ties in with some of the things that we've been talking to investors about. We've also heard a similar kind of feedback from investors that we want to know what you're up to. And I think one of the implications for us is to get our investor relations guys working more closely with our sustainability folks, so that story can be told in a more consistent manner. So I think you make a very good point.
And your point there is exactly right. So if there is a investor relations and strategy conversation on the left-hand side, and then somewhere on the right or on the back page, there is the sustainability conversation and some indicators about the good stuff that Tata or anybody else is doing, and there's no link, then you should expect, right, that investors will kind of say these are just separate things, and the sustainability stuff is just some corporate reputation, and it's good, but it's not fundamental to the business. So training our strategy people and our CFOs and the investor relations team to be in a position where they can describe how the sustainability agenda, done well, done Tata style, will create real value, and that we have a plan of execution that is every bit as rigorous as what we do in the rest of our business, is again how you, if you will, crack the code. And it is what the Unilevers of the world do. It is what the BMWs, it's what Walmarts have done. You can go company after company, you look at the top 100 companies in the world who are cracking this. Philips, right? They gear their research and development agenda increasingly to sustainable products, and they provide clear certification, and they explain to the market not that this is a sustainability agenda, but that they are playing into the biggest problems that the world faces, and for which therefore there will be huge markets over the next 5 to 10 years, and they will be positioned to win in those games.
To just move to the sustainable development goals, because many of us, and I'm one of them, who believe that it provides a very interesting framework to look at sustainability as a whole, to sort of identify the big issues that planet and society face, and to place business in that context.
Yep.
Use that as a framework for how business looks at its own business is, in my mind, a good one. But one of the pushbacks we keep getting from companies is 17 goals, 169 targets. It all seems very complex. And I think many companies are kind of saying, I don't know whether this really works for us.
Yeah.
So you chair the Global Commission on Sustainable Development. I'm just wondering, how do you see this? What kind of an answer would you give to a company that says, this is too complicated and too many things you're asking us to do?
So I'd start off by being sympathetic to them, right? I think, you know, and this of course is one of the criticisms that has been leveled at the global goals. You know, too complicated, you know, no prioritization, a failure of leadership, right, is the, if you will, the tougher line. We were better off when we had, you know, just the Millennium Development Goals, the 8 of them, and the focus on that. Now, I'm in the camp which says that the global goals are a huge step forward. Right? They're a huge step forward because they're goals for everybody. They're not just targeted at developing countries. They are goals that effectively show how the economic agenda, the growth agenda, links to the social agenda, links to the environmental agenda, and all of this is linked to better governance, right? To dealing with institutional quality and tackling corrupt practices, because at the core, if we don't get our institutions work, nothing else is going to deliver. So I think that these global goals are a huge step forward. They explicitly embrace the private sector. And the one thing I would say is that, and I'm sure this is something that you're doing across the group, you know, it is not the case that every company within the group should try and embrace all 17 goals. That's crazy, right? Because then it becomes just a cloud, right, of fragmented effort. What I would hope is that every company can see 2 or 3 goals, and maybe only one, right, where they say, this is the goal that we can see as relevant and material to our business, that if we do it well, it will enhance our business performance, and we're going to get behind this one as our flagship goal. And then there may be 2 or 3 others that are in, if you will, the second priority.
Right.
And then there's a piece of this which I know at Tata you think about deeply, which is on the others, just checking in to make sure that you're doing no harm. Right? That, you know, by focusing on 1 or 4, you haven't then lost the plot on everything else. But it's classic business stuff, right? Pick the one that makes the biggest difference to the bottom line performance, get behind it in a good way, see the linkages between the environmental goal, if that's your one, and the governance goal or a gender goal, right? See the linkage and make it reinforcing. And then for the rest, make sure that you're meeting the hygiene bar.
One of the things that companies are telling us is, look, if you put absolute targets, you take something like water
Yep.
or carbon,
Yep.
if you put an absolute target, our businesses are growing. So our carbon footprint is bound to grow. So why don't you think about us putting intensity targets rather than absolute targets?
Great question. I wish I had a fantastic answer to it, but I'll give you an answer, which is that you probably need both. Right? This is one where we have to steer the ship, and it's quite a sophisticated evolution and transition. So what I would say, and this is where I think sustainability thinking does help, is that number one, Tata should aim to be a 2-degree company. You should be able to articulate how, over the next 20 years, broadly speaking, right, and you have to make a set of assumptions. This group is going to operate within a 2-degree world. You know, there is, that's the right thing to do, and I believe it can be done profitably. So that's number one. Number two is that in articulating that overall agenda, there will be places and companies within the group where there'll be particular challenges, right? Either because the technology is not where it needs to be, or because of the financing problems, just the cost of shifting to fully renewable power makes you uncompetitive, or because the policy settings are wrong. And so let's get those on the table. Let's understand where we need to see a shift in one of those variables, technology, finance, or policy, to be able to be a 2-degree company. And then we need to go and have a plan to get after those. Number three, what I would say is that there is probably an evolution. I mean, if you thought about this, and this is overly simplistic, but if you said, look, we're going to take a 20-year view, because sorting this is not the next 5 years, and we are going to set ourselves an absolute target over the 20 years, but for the first 10 years of that, we're going to be more in the intensity space, and then we are setting ourselves up now to shift to absolute targets in 10 years' time. Now, I don't know whether that's the right timing or not. It may be 7 years, or maybe you have a 7-year period where it's intensity, a 7-year where you have a hybrid, and then the last 7 years it's absolute. But lay out the roadmap to move from legitimately, for a fast-growing company, or for those bits of Tata that are fast-growing, the intensity game, and then how are you going to make that shift to absolute so that you can hold your head high and be one of the companies in the world that's genuinely a 2-degree company.
Great. That's, I think, very, very useful information, or useful way of thinking about it. In fact, that would hold true for almost all the natural capital that's available. Right? Even for water, you start with intensity, but very soon you
have a plan. And how are we going to shift from the intensity to the absolute?
Absolutely. You wrote The New Climate Economy, and you spoke about various kinds of interventions and sectors that can sort of contribute or as part of that economy. As you know, we have a lot of companies in the IT space. And I think one of the questions that our IT companies would be very interested in knowing is, where does the IT information technology fit into this new global economy? What's the sort of role, what's the sort of responsibility even that it has in this economy?
Well, they'll be delighted to know that it fits in everywhere, right? That's the simple answer. Look, what we know, Shankar, is that if you want to have economic growth and shared prosperity, so not just any old growth, but the right kind of growth, and to decouple that from resource use over time, and to make the resource side more circular and more efficient, there is only one way to do that. And then the key in this, Shankar, is to find the leverage points. Where is it that, for, in some sense, the smallest change in a particular variable, policy, technology, finance, typically, you can get the biggest shift in the system? And how do you build a coalition of interest around that? And that is, right back to the beginning of the interview, that's what Systemic, the new company that I've set up, is all about doing. How does it differ from the way it operates today in terms of its outputs? And then how do we build, if you want, an understanding of that change pathway with its leverage points, get coalitions to come together, and then here's the magic. If we get this right, we turn these system problems into huge markets. They are the markets of tomorrow, and that is why sustainability in today's era, right, is and can be right at the heart of great disruptive strategy. The strategies that transform markets and create huge value, both for society and for Tata shareholders.
Great. We've been hearing about ocean thermal, solar power generation in space, global grids.
Right.
Are these all very fanciful, or they actually you actually see that happening?
Look, I don't know about global grids in space, but what I will tell you is that I am stunned at two things. One is that I'm stunned at the rate of technological progress. I mean, we look at solar power today, and I'm not saying it's perfect and everything's solved. In fact, there are multiple ways to improve its performance. But compared to where it was 5-7 years ago, it's a transformative shift in the capacity of the world to deliver energy, not just on a clean basis, but on a distributed basis across India, across multiple off-grid locations. So there's something phenomenal happening, right? And in a very short period of time, when I really began thinking about some of the climate and energy work before Copenhagen, 8-10 years ago, the idea that we would be in a world where over half of the investments in the power sector globally are now renewable energy would have been laughed out of court. Insane. And it's now happening because the cost has come down so fast. We have been stunned at the companies coming through to us with phenomenal technological possibilities.
You wrote The New Climate Economy, and you spoke about various kinds of interventions and sectors that can sort of contribute or as part of that economy. As you know, we have a lot of companies in the IT space. And I think one of the questions that our IT companies would be very interested in knowing is, where does the IT information technology fit into this new global economy? What's the sort of role, what's the sort of responsibility even that it has in this economy?
Well, they'll be delighted to know that it fits in everywhere, right? That's the simple answer. Look, what we know, Shankar, is that if you want to have economic growth and shared prosperity, so not just any old growth, but the right kind of growth, and to decouple that from resource use over time, and to make the resource side more circular and more efficient, there is only one way to do that, right? And that is to drive innovation. That gives me hope, and I think it should give us all hope, that not that the technology will be the silver bullet that will, and there's one technology that will solve everything, but there is a technological wave that we can ride. We have to, as ever, combine it with good policy that sends the right signals to markets. Bad policies that subsidize the wrong things or that allow for the destruction of natural capital get in the way, right? They get in the way. But good policy, good finance, commitment to actually, explaining this as leaders across a company like Tata, all of that brought together in a powerful way leads me to think that we'll have bumps in the road over the next 20-30 years, no question, right? But there is a solution, and that Tata could be right at the heart of it.
Jeremy, thank you so much. It was indeed a great pleasure.
Great pleasure for me to be with you. Thank you.